The lips, the teeth, the tip of the tongue. Hold on. Sorry. From its introduction as a medical term to its rebranding in the 1990s, the word intersex has been reclaimed by activists, and it's a word that challenges how doctors treat intersex bodies. So how much do you really know about the history of the word intersex? Stick with me to find out. Intersex is an umbrella term that refers to people who carry variations in their reproductive and sexual anatomy that differ from what's traditionally male or female. An intersex person can appear to have one kind of genitalia on the outside and another internally. They might have some XX chromosomes and some XY chromosomes. They can have ambiguous genitalia or not, and know at birth that they're intersex or find out later on. The bottom line, intersex is a word with a broad meaning, and we've only been using it this way for the past 100 years. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, the word intersex has been around since the late 1700s. Before the 20th century, the term was rare and referred to relations between the sexes. It was only in 1917 that a German geneticist named Richard Goldschmidt used the term in a way that we understand it today. In his research, Goldschmidt created the term to describe moths with atypical sex characteristics, and it extended to humans who, at the time, would have been called hermaphrodites. The term hermaphrodite was used in 18th and 19th century medical literature to describe individuals who were intersex. Now considered a derogatory slur, the term evoked a mythical creature and the pursuit of a body with both male and female reproductive anatomy. Staying in the 19th century for a moment, we can get a sense of the discrimination that intersex people have faced throughout history. In the 1860s, French newspapers reported on the reclassification of Herculine Barbin, an intersex woman who was forced to live as a man and committed suicide when she was just 30 years old. Barbin was painted as a monster by the press. We'll come back to Herculine Barbin in the early aughts when the word intersex gets a big spotlight. Back to the 20th century, after the geneticist Richard Goldschmidt used the term in his paper, intersex and hermaphrodite were used interchangeably in articles through the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. The 1950s marked a turning point for the word intersex and the ways being intersex was pathologized by both doctors and the public. Dr. John Money, a psychologist, began writing in the 1950s that intersex people were psychologically healthy, but would turn out even better if babies were made to look like the gender they were being raised. Money and his team at Johns Hopkins believed that gender identity was a matter of nurture and not nature, and that changing a child's body surgically and supplementing it with hormones would make them a boy or a girl. His theory was that babies were malleable before they were 18 months old. In a 1967 study, Money claimed that a boy was able to live successfully as a girl after his penis was burned in a circumcision accident. The baby was castrated and had a surgery to appear female. It didn't work. 30 years later, Money's subject was living as a man, and the baby wasn't even intersex. Money's research and the hundreds of articles he wrote changed the direction of how intersex people were treated medically. Until the 50s, most surgeries to alter intersex traits were done on adults who chose to undergo such procedures or whose doctors pressured them to do it. There was pressure to normalize bodies to avoid homosexuality because the thinking was that a person didn't know who to avoid having sex with if they didn't know their own sex. The Hopkins team gave way to new protocol where intersex children were given so-called corrective genital surgeries and hormone treatments, often without their knowledge and consent, and even if the surgeries were not medically necessary. For the next 3 decades, the word intersex proliferated along with such surgeries until intersex people came together to reclaim the terminology. In the late 1980s, the intersex movement began to percolate. Intersex people, who had been subject to secrecy about their medical records and made to feel ashamed of their bodies, began organizing groups and circles. In 1993, an activist then named Cheryl Chase wrote a letter to The Sciences, a magazine, in a response to a paper about sex and gender. In it, Chase announced the founding of the Intersex Society of North America. Surgical and hormonal treatment allows parents and doctors to imagine that they have eliminated the child's intersexuality. Unfortunately, the surgery is immensely destructive to the sexual sensation and of the sense of bodily integrity, the letter read. In 1996, intersex activism became more visible. The first ever intersex demonstration was held on October 26, later becoming Intersex Awareness Day, when ISNA activists protested a conference held by the American Academy of Pediatrics in Boston. Activists used the slogan, "Hermaphrodites with Attitude," on signs, shirts, and newsletters as a way to reclaim the term hermaphrodite. this shifted to Intersex as they sought to work with doctors to stop non-consensual surgeries. In the 2000s, Intersex entered pop culture, to mixed results. In 2002, Jeffrey Eugenides published his best-selling book, Middlesex. Eugenides wrote the book after reading Herculine Barbin's posthumously published memoir. Middlesex told the fictional story of an intersex young man and has been criticized for fetishizing the shame and suffering intersex people experience. After selecting Middlesex for her book club, Oprah featured intersex people on her show in 2007 to talk about their experiences, not without a salacious spin, of course.
All new. Are you male or female? Simple question, right? For today's guest, the answer is much more complicated. They'll tell you why. And the preferred description is intersex.
A 2006 episode of House further hit on bad tropes when a girl in the fictional hospital is found to have internal testes and was really a boy. The episode played into the idea that there is a true marker of sex, an idea that has historically characterized how doctors approach intersex people. While the term intersex gained more traction and challenged the idea that there was anything to fix with intersex bodies, new terminology arrived in 2005. DSD, or disorders of sex development, was introduced in medical settings as another way to describe being intersex. DSD, a controversial term, frames being intersex as a disorder in need of treatment rather than a biological variation. In fact, activists fear that if parents of intersex kids are told their child has a disorder of sex development, they won't be able to make an informed choice about surgery or even know it means intersex. Even in the media, it's only recently that intersex hasn't been treated as a medical diagnosis. In 2014, the organization Interact worked with MTV to develop the first character where being intersex was an identity. And in August 2018, California passed a resolution acknowledging that non-consensual intersex medical interventions are an abuse of human rights, the first piece of legislation of its kind here in the United States, a major win for the intersex community. Today, intersex is still being reclaimed by people as a way of challenging how doctors have treated their bodies. Intersex people continue fighting non-consensual surgeries and are seeking legislation to protect kids from these procedures. Intersex is entering a new terrain as a human rights issue to allow people to make choices about their own bodies. Since the 90s, intersex has found its power, and it's not slowing down.